Okay, we're here in Wimbledon, England to interview Professor Adam Curl, who, among other things, in a long and distinguished career, has been the first Professor of Peace Studies at the University of Bradford, has, as a member of the Society of Friends, engaged in peacemaking initiatives throughout the world in places such as Nigeria, Croatia and the Balkans, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and indeed has every justifiable claim to be called one of the founding parents of the field. So Adam, thank you for giving us this time. And what we're trying to do in this project, as we were explaining before, is to look back at the origins of peace studies and conflict studies, to get some idea for the next generations how it all started and where the ideas came from. And you're obviously one of the people that we have to talk to about this, because you were extremely instrumental, not just in Britain but also internationally. So I'm going to run through a series of questions, and there are about 20 of them, just to get your reactions to and your memories of some of those early days, which you and I, to some degree, shared anyway in Britain. So what first sort of attracted you to, peace research and peace activism? You've talked a lot of about what you've done, but what first got you into it?
Well, I can tell you very briefly. After the war, the 14-18 war, I finished my sort of university courses, got a PhD, and was a member of was recruited as a member of a team which was run out of Harvard in the States to help development in Pakistan, and I spent 3 years as officially advisor on social development. Looking at Pakistan now, I must say I don't think I obviously was very successful, but I had an extremely interesting time. And
it was a big job. It was a big job. I mean.
Big job, yeah. Well, nobody knew what I was supposed to do. What I decided to do eventually was to go to anywhere where there was a tribal conflict or epidemic or some kind of social chaos, and I think I did a reasonably sensible way of approaching it. The most interesting part was which I went with my wife, and which was the main part of my project in Pakistan, to the really remote northern part of Pakistan, which is along the borders of China and Tibet, and had some very interesting adventures there, but not particularly exciting from a peace point of view, except as illustrations of corrupt and brutal societies. So when I came back, and I went to my next assignment was to Ghana, where I was at a university, and from the University of Ghana got recruited back into Harvard, and my great interest then was development in relationship to economic development, social development and economic development. And I was concerned about West Africa, and particularly about Nigeria, because although I was mainly working in another country, it was obvious that there was going to be trouble in Nigeria, and it's a big country. There's going to be big and possibly dreadful implications of the political disturbance which is going on already. And so then, when I got invited to go join a group going to try to do some peacemaking in inverted commas in Nigeria, I was very happy. Well, I should have said something before. Before this, what I'm going to talk about at a bit length. Well, before I went to go back to Nigeria, I was asked to go as an intermediary between India and Pakistan. I knew the president of Pakistan. I had even met Indira Gandhi, who was the prime minister then, and spent some time shuttling back and forth for a couple of hours between India and Pakistan. And I must say, I did this in a very pagan sort of spirit. I thought I was very pleased with myself. I thought how wonderful to be doing international mediation, and I was very, very cock-a-hoop about it. And I didn't feel any very great personal, emotional, political, yes, but no deep feelings about what I was doing. But when the Nigerian issue came up a little bit later, then I was really sucked right into it immediately and became completely devoted to working for that. And it was a 3-year slog. It was difficult and dangerous and terrifying, really. And terrifying is not so much personally for me, although sometimes, but certainly implications are terrifying for the whole population of what was known as Biafra, which is a breakaway part of Nigeria which wanted to be independent. And this was 3 years of back and forth, very difficult, dangerous journeys in rickety planes, landing on strips of cleared jungle and without the help of light, because they couldn't come in at daylight, and even at night the lights all had to be switched off for fear that the federal fighters would come in. And with 2 hours, I spent these 3 years going back and forth between the rebels in Biafra and the government. And we got to know these people extremely well. The leaders of Biafra were a very fine group of intellectuals. 2 of them were university heads. One of them was Chinua Achebe, who's a
novelist.
Yes. Although I didn't see much of him, but he was involved. The leader was a man called Ojukwu, Chukwuemeka Odumengu Ojukwu. Yeah. I didn't really like very much. He was a very intelligent, powerful, ruthless, selfish individual. The person I did like also very much on the other side was the young president who was called
Jack Gowan. Gowan?
Yes, Gowan.
Yeah, okay.
And I liked him very much. And we talked a great deal about the progress of the war. And in fact, I think it was there was one issue which was sort of crucial, which I was involved in. There was an awful massacre of women carried out. Well, it wasn't a massacre in the sense of people slashing away, but a plane flying over a marketplace full of women, 28 women, mostly with babies on their backs, and it dropped a sort of bomb which spreads around, cluster bomb or whatever, and they were all killed. And this was very horrifying. And as soon as I heard about it, I got back to federal Nigeria, which as usual went a very difficult journey out of Biafra, fly up to London, fly down to Lisbon, and so on. And anyway, I went to see Gowan, and we talked a great deal about it, and his first response, well, it's a ghastly thing, and he was very horrified by it. But this was war, and it was a rebellion, and if he let that sort of thing go on, it's just been that more and more people were killed. And so I just have to make them realize that resistance is useless, and promise them amnesty if they lay down their arms. So tell them that. So I went and I told them that, and they said, absolute nonsense. They said, we don't believe a word his bastard says. We don't believe in his amnesties. Why have they been doing this so far? I tried to explain that he thought to do anything to do with stuff. They realized, they said, well, we feel that he's just a bloodthirsty bastard. He wants to really decimate the population. So it went on, but then a bit later, I was in London. I had a year's sabbatical, and I was in London. I got a telephone call from the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, and he said, "We've just heard that the war's coming to an end. It's going to be finished, and what we are all afraid of now is that there'll be an absolute bloodbath of the victorious federal soldiers slaughtering the Igbos." And if he said to me, you're somebody who knows the leadership on both sides. If you can get down right away, you may be able to do something to mitigate this. So I did. I took the first plane I could to get down, and had no idea what I was going to do. I imagined myself standing like a sort of traffic cop between two hostile groups, and being run over by one of their armoured cars. But when I got there, absolute opposite. The Nigerians had won, and instead of killing the Biafran soldiers, they treated them as brothers. They gave them their food, they gave them cigarettes, they looked after them, they took them to hospital if they needed it, and it was finished like that.
How extraordinary.
Incredible, and everybody thought this was a miracle. But of course, Gowan had made promises which he kept. And of course this didn't affect the average soldier in the battle. But the people who'd been ambassadors, those high civil servants and all the rest of it, before the war, but who then joined the Biafrans, they immediately put back into their jobs. And if there wasn't a vacancy, they were put on full pay.
Good heavens.
Until there was. So that was it, and I just I went back home.
Hmm?
I've not been there since.
So there's always been a slight division between those people in the field who think of themselves as peace researchers and those who think of themselves as conflict researchers. Do you think there's any real difference between the two?
Yeah, there's so many sides to it. I spent 2 years working on Zimbabwe too, for example, and it's just a question of going round and round and round. In the Zimbabwe situation, there were the two rebel armies, one based in Zambia, another based in Mozambique, and then of course there's the ones in the so-called British ones in what was in Rhodesia.
Yes. No.
Going round and round them, and going off at tangents to talk to Nyerere, who was the chairman of the heads of state committee, who was looking after it. Going to South Africa to see what they were up to. No good. Around and round and round, and trying to see if there's any glimmer of a hope that something might be done to smooth out some difficulty or other.
Well, you wrote about this and a little bit about the Nigerian thing in that book you wrote called In the Middle, which I still use with my students because I think it's a nice summary of some of the practical problems of actually going round and round and round.
Yes.
Yeah, it is, as you say, a matter of just keep persisting. And how did your Zimbabwean thing turn out? Because that seemed initially to be a successful example of peacemaking. That, they managed to get them together at Lancaster House, and there was a smooth turnover of power, and for a while it looked very hopeful there.
It was all very dubious, though. I mean, the Brits behaved exceptionally badly.
That was Lord Carrington, wasn't it? Who was Lord Carrington? I think was the foreign minister at the time. Wasn't he the guy who was in charge of the British policy? I think.
Yes.
So,
and they were trying to put the blame on the I'm looking at that. Sorry. I was asked to go down and stay in Salisbury, as it was then, after the end of the war and before the concluding agreements. And the British were doing everything they could to ensure that Bishop Muzorewa would be the one who would take over.
Yeah, okay.
And I used to talk to him, but I never had much of a sense of what he was really like. I mean, probably a decent little chap. But the dirty tricks carried out were unbelievable. One of the things was that a lot of churches were blown up. Well, the churches, anti-religious. Who's anti-religious? Communists are anti-religious. Therefore, communists and what's his name, Muzorewa, obviously in cahoots together.
Mugabe.
Mugabe, and they were saying that churches were blown up, but unfortunately for this argument, sometimes white legs or arms were found in the wreckage, so they knew it wasn't. It wasn't.
It wasn't Mugabe, and it wasn't ZANU.
And even when the Lancaster House talks were going on, there were all sorts of dubious things happening.
Yeah, yes, if I remember that, they had a sort of pecking order, which was, you know, they wanted it to be Bishop Muzorewa. If it wasn't going to be Bishop Muzorewa, they wanted it to be Joshua Nkomo.
Yeah.
And the last person they wanted was Mugabe, who of course got in finally.
Yes.
By a massive majority.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Mm.
They tried, but I must say the Brits also treated it very, very badly.
Mm.
No, they couldn't, they weren't even allowed to bring into the country stocks of paper with their
Really?
with their names on it.
Mm-hmm.
Not their names, address and titles and so on. No, it was very unpleasant. I got very unpopular with them.
So it must have been a relief to get up to Bradford and start work at that. That must have been quite a task.
Yes.
Starting a new department.
Yes. Oh, it was good fun.
Mm.
I quite enjoyed that.
So when you got there, it was just you, wasn't it? I think to begin with.
I'm sorry.
It was only you in the department, and then was it Tom Woodhouse who got appointed? I can't remember.
We had, I think, 3 lecturers, or was it 4?
It was very small.
Nigel Young.
Nigel, of course. Yeah. Oh yes, Nigel, of course.
The Israeli, the Indian, and
right. The Israeli was Yuri Davis. Was that?
That's right.
Yuri
Yes,
Davis.
yes.
Nigel, and yes, I remember you had the Indian guy, and I can't remember what his name was either.
I remember it very well, but I can't bring it out, actually. He's a very nice guy.
Yes, yes, I can see his face, but I can't put a name to him. It's silly.
And of course, not as at that stage as the lecturer Tom Woodhouse.
Okay, so yes, Tom goes back a long way, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yes, he was the first person I appointed. I appointed him as a sort of research assistant because I could see he was intelligent and good person to have around, and he was very useful to me.
So, how did you? What were some of the big influences on the kinds of courses you taught? Who were the textbooks you used? Who were the people who influenced how you shaped the course at Bradford? Because you must have been making the thing out of original cloth at that stage. Because I think I remember John Burton coming up once and giving a lecture for you, and Michael Nicholson.
I don't know if he came up to Bradford, but I did see him, and I was interested in him, and I mean, I got a great deal out of all the earlier people, but I came to a conclusion, really, in the last few years, that there are only 2 sorts of things which I've done which were at all useful, and otherwise there's a lot of scudding around and talking to people and so on. I thought we did have some degree of influence in Nigeria. Anywhere else, I don't know. I mean, we met with people, we talked to them, we made friends, we discussed, and sometimes something useful came out and sometimes it didn't, or sometimes we got good ideas which we hadn't had before. But basically I've found really only two things which seem to me to have been at all significant. And the first was the Nigerian one. And one of the, of course, very important aspects of that was being really friends with some of the leaders, being able to talk to them. Now, moving right on via various sort of little bits and pieces like Rwanda, I don't mean that sounds sort of insulting, but
Well,
I had some quite good relationships with some of the leaders. The really important thing to me was Croatia and Bosnia. And the town of Osijek was a town which was besieged for a long time and being shelled and bombed. There were about 10% of the population were killed. And it was very disastrous and awful, really. It was surrounded on four sides, and people could sit on the opposite side of the river and shoot into the town. Well, here was something entirely different from what I'd ever experienced before, because the people who were the, so to speak, peace movement were entirely different. It didn't follow any kind of dogma of the former people who've been involved in conflict and so on. They were very much at odds with the leaders. There was the warlord, local warlord, was highly hostile for anyone who mentioned the word peace. Would have them killed very often. And but there was this one woman called Katerina, I mentioned, Katerina Kruhonia, and a man. She was a very good Catholic. Yes, Catholic, not Greek Orthodox. And there was one other man called Kufrit, and they were the two people. They got together. She was a very religious, spiritual person. He was a very intelligent atheist, but they were great friends, and they admired and liked each other very much. And they were trying to persuade people to think, not to think so much about war, but to think about what could be done for the victims of war. People, because the town was full of people who'd lost husbands, sons, fathers, who'd lost their jobs, houses been destroyed, who'd suffered, in one way or another. And they set up organizations to try to help them. These were viewed with the greatest suspicion. I first got there because I was invited to go to a peace conference, and Katerina had actually organised a peace conference, which was very much a flop because nobody was interested in peace. But at the end of it, I said to her, "Look, I'd like to come back and stay a bit longer and get to know a bit more. Would that be all right?" So she said yes. So after a couple of weeks, I went, and I went back and forth constantly for the next 8 years, and was with this group of people, which gradually grew. A very courageous, sensitive, wise, delightful group of men, men and women. And at times they were in real danger. And in fact, I spent a lot of my time trying to take steps which would stop them from being assassinated. Then, just as an example, Katerina and her colleague Kruno went to talk to the deputy warlord and made some sort of perfectly honest, not particularly peaceful proposal. I mean, just it's neutral. And before they been able to spell out what they wanted, the warlords attacked them violently and said, "Don't know if you've got the impertinence to come and talk to me about this now." They said that, you know, far from wanting to agree to help you in any way, I have great trouble in preventing you from being shot. The people of this town hate you. The soldiers are ready. They tell me they want to shoot you. I say no, better not. Really awful. And she was very shaken. And we spent the evening. I remember trying to think if there might be something that they could do which would mitigate the hostility and the danger. And we couldn't think of anything really, anything which was significant. Which would, nothing significant which, because it would contravene their principles. So we were very worried about that. I then had to go off somewhere. I forget why. When I got back, I found that the whole group, which is now enlarged, of course, the whole group were very cheerful and jolly. I said, "How come you're so cheerful and light-hearted?" And they said, "Well, it's like this. Once we had made up our minds that we were absolutely not going to give an inch in abandoning what we were trying to do, which is to help other human beings in this town, we felt really light-hearted. We felt that we'd made our decision, come what may." And they were. And they continued. And I was very worried about one thing, which was that the headquarters of the group, which had now formed itself into a group, of course, were in the cloister of an old sort of ruined monastery, and the next, it was in the old town. Next door to it was the military headquarters. And I was worried that they might, oh yes, I missed out an important thing. They decided to hold a street party. There's a very attractive old square just outside this. And they decided to hold a street party there with games for the kids, and music and dancing, and also village sort of bringing in their vegetables and other things from around. This time the siege had been loosed a bit. And I thought, well, they're brave to do this. It'll aggravate the soldiers next time. Not a bit of it, because what happened was that the soldiers contributed to providing lunch for everybody. So that was amazing. And that illustrates what I think was a really key thing about the whole of this particular story, was that they created a spirit which had then permeated throughout the town and touched on people. It wasn't because they were doing anything to further the war effort, not at all, but they'd brought another psychological, psychic, spiritual, whatever, force to bear, which had an amazing impact. And in fact, the man who'd been originally the mayor of the town and had been dismissed because he was too gentle, he was reappointed. Now, this has been going on since, what year is it now?
It's 2005 now.
It's been going on since 91.
Really? And it's survived that long?
It's survived that long and has grown enormously. The whole town has given it a great new building and a cathedral square. And it's well known now. There's people, little replicas all over the place in the Balkans.
All right, let me ask you about something that you're very closely connected with, and this is this whole idea of conflict transformation. You were one of the first people to write about it. Where did the ideas come from for that? I mean, why did you? All right, sorry. Why did you? Where did you get that idea from? You know, the idea that resurrection.
Well, I can't remember where it first came from, but the person I associate with it very much is Diana Francis, who's been sharing this CCTS. Anyway, the organisation which meets every month or so, which I've unfortunately not been able to go to for the last few years. And it was certainly under her aegis, I think, that that came about. What this last book is about is based on a sort of theory of people's minds, as I mentioned. One mind being what I call the black cloud, which is really a sort of accumulation of misery, despair, rage, fear, hatred, sort of merging with stupidity, longing for revenge, you know.
I see why you call it the black cloud,
Yeah, and this is something which has probably always been there, but very much intensified in the last century, starting with approximately the Great War. The greater volume of people killed in nasty ways that the world's ever seen, really. And that is something which the emanations of which sort of seeps into all of our minds.
Yeah.
And what are the effects of that? Well, there's I think a human mind, which is of course beginning to be greatly distorted by that, and what I call a universal mind. I don't mean a god, but some sort of factor which is maybe just common to our solar system or not. I don't know, but something which I think is a different factor, very impersonal, but very constructive, which I've begun to feel very, very much, and especially here on my own in the evenings and starting to write and probably feeling tired and fed up and not very well, so on. And then suddenly, or not suddenly, but gradually, this sort of other kind of pressure comes, like a kind of psychic massage. And I end up by feeling invigorated and energetic and my mind suddenly clearing. And I feel this is it's not a personal thing, but it's just something, another kind of force which is acting on me. And this is a counterpoise to the black cloud. And really it's about the relationship between this and firstly various sorts of activity like war, and secondly on whole countries. And I've got bits of descriptions of places where I've been, where I think a black cloud has been very powerful, and has grown much more so in my own experience in a very short time. So that's what I've done, and which is in the process of being published now.